Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, today we're going to dive back into some medieval history. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about, and it's been a while since we visited the channel Geohistory. They've now hit 1 million subscribers, so congratulations on that. This particular video is the 100 Years' War explained on a map, and I know everybody likes to drop the fact it wasn't 100 Years' War, it's 116 Years' War. Nobody calls things the 116 Years' War. It's just a lot easier and just kind of seems cooler to say 100 Years' War. So it's one of those things that's really not worth like bickering over. It was 116 years, and it wasn't one long war. It was a series of conflicts that broke out here and there over time, sometimes lasting a few years. In the midst, you have plague, and you have all kinds of other stuff going on, and it's a really consequential time in Western European history, especially for England and France. So I think it's a good topic to dive into. I'll put the link down in the description, and I'll add this video to my playlist for all of the videos that where we've taken a look at geohistory. I do want to give a shout out and a thank you to Daniel in Copenhagen, Denmark. Thank you for your continued support on Patreon. He's been a patron since September of last year. So thank you so much for your support. Let's get into this one.
We begin at the end of the 13th century in Western Europe. The Kingdom of France is one of the greatest powers on the continent, benefiting from a favorable climate and the many rivers that irrigate the territory. Agriculture thrives and is able to sustain its 16 million inhabitants.
So this is a great example of a lens through which to view history, which is agriculture, food. Something as simple as that makes or breaks a kingdom. And if you're able to feed your people can thrive, and other people may come to that. And France, for a good bit of Western European history, has been the most populous nation in that part of the world. And it's one of the strengths that they have going for it. What they don't have going for it is the stability of their royal family, which is one of the causes for this war.
Countryside is largely controlled by nobles who are vassals of the king. In exchange for their lands, they're required in particular to finance and equip a heavy cavalry, which is one of the most powerful in Europe.
Right, this is the feudal system, right? This is the time and place in history where you have a system that's built less on territory and borders and more on connections between lords and vassals. And it's different everywhere, and it comes and goes in different places, but that's kind of what you're dealing with here is you pay taxes up the chain, you provide soldiers up the chain, we provide you stability and legitimacy and all those sorts of things.
Across the English Channel lies the Kingdom of England with a population of 4 million. The climate here is cooler and wetter.
Notice that difference, right? England's 1/4 the population of France.
Encouraging peasants to focus on livestock farming, especially sheep. As a result, the country is a major producer of wool, which is exported to Flanders, where the textile industry is flourishing.
And you have the massive what they call the cloth hall in Ypres, Belgium. It's Belgium now, it's Flanders as it was known then. So there's that strong connection between England and where they can export their wool, and Ypres is thriving because of it.
England also trades with Brittany, which supplies it with salt, essential for food preservation. Further south, the king has controlled the Duchy of Guyenne for 150 years, where a favorable climate supports vineyards that supply London with wine. But this territory has long been a source of tension between England and France, which seeks to reclaim it. To avoid war, the King of England officially holds the status of Duke of Guyenne, meaning he is a vassal of the King of France and must pay homage to him by kneeling before him. In return, the King of France holds judicial authority over the territory.
This is where it's like crazy complicated, right? Because you're King of England, but you're a duke of territory that's part of the Kingdom of France. And so you're a king, but you're also a duke that pays homage to a king. And in a sense, that makes that king kind of feel like he's superior to you. Of course, we have Aquitaine down here, which gets married into the
In
English throne.
1294, following clashes between Breton, Basque, and English sailors, the Bretons appealed to the French king, Philip IV, for justice.
Yeah, the Bretons are a different group, right? They're Celtic, and so in a lot of ways they have more similarities with, say, Wales than they do with France or England.
Summons the Duke of Guienne, namely the King of England, Edward I, before his court. But the latter refuses, and Philip IV confiscates Guienne, triggering a war. But at the same time, England is already engaged in Scotland, which it fails to subdue in...
Right, this is right around the time of William Wallace, right? You know, the fictionalized version in Braveheart. But that's what we're talking about is the 1290s. This is Edward Longshanks, Edward I of England. You're dealing with William Wallace, who's going to be executed not long after this, and eventually going to have the Battle of Bannockburn in 1307 and Scottish independence after that.
Which forms an alliance with France. Meanwhile, France faces difficulties in Flanders, whose economic interests are closely tied to England.
Right.
In Rome, the Pope eventually secures peace between the two Catholic powers and encourages dynastic marriages to ease tensions. In 1308, the King of England, Edward II, marries the French Princess Isabella, who is only 12 years old.
And this is another lens through which you have to view history as genealogy. And I know as a professional genealogist myself, it's obviously something that if you've been around long, you know I'm very passionate about. And even the books that I write are heavily influenced by genealogy. But you have to understand genealogy to understand all of this, because the entire 100 Years' War is going to be based on familial relationships and marriages and descent. And this particular marriage is going to produce Edward III, who was not the child of William Wallace, like you see in Braveheart.
She moves to England, where the war with Scotland continues. In 1324, after a border dispute in Guienne, a new war breaks out between France and England. In response, Edward II seizes the properties of French subjects living in England, including that of his own wife, Isabella.
Well, Edward II, long rumored to be homosexual, always portrayed rather effeminately. Well, not always, but often portrayed that way. Always portrayed as a very poor king, which he certainly was. Had favorites that just got him in trouble with his own nobles. And so Isabella and her lover, Roger Mortimer, are actually the ones who are running the country for a while. And Edward II is kind of sidelined in all of this. And eventually you're going to have a situation where Edward III is going to rise up and take back his own kingdom. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself.
He then sends her to Paris to negotiate peace with her brother, King Charles IV. The latter agrees to restore Guienne on the condition that Edward II come and pay homage.
Right.
Refusing to humiliate himself, Edward II transfers the duchy to his young son, Edward of Windsor, and sends him to Paris to pay homage to his uncle. Peace is restored, but instead of...
That's actually a pretty clever idea on Edward II's part. To do that from a king who's not known for necessarily being particularly clever. But he's sending his son, the future Edward III, who is not a king. And so then that kind of calms the issue.
Returning to England, Isabella remains in France with her son and begins preparing the downfall of Edward II.
So it seemed like a clever idea, but now his wife and the Prince of Wales, the son, that's a title we know today as the Prince of Wales. Can't remember exactly when that comes about, but it may have been by that point. But now they're both in France, and they're effectively separate in many ways from Edward II.
Small army of mercenaries lands in England and, facing little resistance, enters London. Edward II flees, but he is eventually captured, and in 1327, his son Edward III becomes King of England.
Becomes king in name, but not effectively. He's a teenager. He is not in charge of the country. Edward II is going to die under mysterious circumstances. A later account is going to say that he was killed by having a red-hot poker shoved up his anus. But we think that was probably something that was written later in light of the stories about him being homosexual. Probably not what happened to him.
In France, after the death of Charles IV, there is no longer a direct male heir. Isabella is excluded from the succession in favor of her cousin Philip VI of Valois.
Yeah, so you see now here where the situation is, right? There's no direct male line grandson for Philip IV through a son, through another son. And so the senior heir to the throne of France is Edward III. But now France is going to claim, well, no, we actually have Salic law, which means the inheritance can't pass through a female. But they had never really put it out there that that was the case until it became convenient to do so to keep the English king from inheriting the throne.
Edward III pays homage to him, but in an ambiguous manner, without fully recognizing his authority, and then focuses his efforts on Scotland. But France sends military support to its ally, and tensions rise again. Edward III then restricts wool exports to Flanders in order to put pressure on Philip VI, who responds by confiscating Guyenne.
So again, they're seeing everything through the lens of trade and diplomacy. Restricting wool. This is a common thing that we're going to see for centuries to come, where you withhold things in order to try and coerce. And we're going to see another thing that really comes about in a strong way in the 100 Years' War, which is the idea of destroying an enemy's ability to make war by burning farms and things like that.
Time, Edward III reacts by claiming the French throne as a direct descendant of Philip IV.
This is going to be a title that the English are going to claim for hundreds of years after this. The King of England is going to have, as part of his title, King of France.
Events mark the beginning of what is now known as the 100 Years' War. Edward III lands in Antwerp with an army, and after recruiting Allied forces, moves south. The powerful French cavalry force moves to confront him, and on the battlefield faces the formidable English archers. But neither side takes the initiative, and both withdraw without fighting. At sea, France initially has the advantage, notably thanks to its Genoese allies.
This is before the days when England has this powerful navy. That's really going to start 1600s.
Ports are regularly attacked and ships are captured. In Flanders, the shortage of English wool leads to unemployment among artisans. They revolt against the pro-French count and join Edward III, who they recognize as the King of France. France then assembles a large fleet along the Flemish coast, both to block trade and to prepare for a military invasion of England. But on June 24, 1340, an English fleet attacks and, taking advantage of favorable winds, nearly destroys the French fleet.
Another unexpected factor in all of history is the weather. How many times has history turned on the weather?
English now have control of the seas, securing trade routes and preventing a French invasion. In Guyenne, the war continues, and the English successfully defend Aiguillon, which is besieged by a large French army. Rather than confront the powerful French cavalry in open battle, Edward III chooses to land in the Cotentin Peninsula and launches a chevauchée, meaning...
So, Cotentin Peninsula, this is Normandy, right? This is Normandy right here. These are the beaches that are going to be landed on in 1944. And then going up that peninsula, like actually Utah Beach is actually right here, and then Omaha, and then the other three beaches there. So that's where we're talking about right now.
A destructive raid across the French countryside. The goal is to finance the campaign through plunder while diverting French forces from the south.
So people who talk about William Tecumseh Sherman and his March to the Sea or his Meridian campaign being somehow something new in the history of warfare, not even close. I mean, it's always been done this way. And the difference here is that they're not just destroying everything for the sake of ending the enemy's ability to make war. They're also plundering it and using that to pay their troops. And that's often how it was done. You didn't just outright pay your soldiers a salary. You offered them a share of the loot that you got on campaign.
month and a half, he devastates towns and villages, massacring populations and looting wealth while avoiding confrontation with the army of Philip VI, who tries to intercept him. After days of pursuit, Edward realizes battle is inevitable. Taking advantage of his advance, he selects favorable terrain, positioning his archers on higher ground and digging pits to disorganize the French cavalry.
This is the limitation of cavalry, is that it's great, especially against light infantry or people like archers. It's great if you have the terrain advantage, but if you give up the terrain advantage and you're attacking over terrain that's not conducive to horse maneuvering, and you allow archers on high ground where you can't get at them easily, you're in trouble.
Following day, the French arrive and attack hastily in a disorganized battle. The English and Welsh archers destroy the French cavalry, and Philip VI returns to Paris without an army.
Cressy, this is one of the all-time great victories for the English in their multiple wars against France over time. And of course, you're going to have another one near the end of the 100 Years' War at Agincourt. Very similar situation, using archers to their advantage in ground that's favorable, and it's happening in this region that's kind of north and east of Paris.
Edward III proceeds to besiege Calais. After a year without being attacked, he captures the city and its port, which becomes a key gateway for wool trade to Flanders.
And Calais is going to be in English hands for the next 200 years after this.
Truce is then signed, and Edward III withdraws. But at the same time, the Black Death arrives in Marseille and quickly spreads through France and England, ravaging populations and forcing a pause in the war. In 1350, John II becomes King of France. However, he is immediately challenged by Charles II of Navarre.
So, yeah, they don't say a lot about it there, but understand that this plague, this Black Death, this is going to kill anywhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of the entire population of Western Europe. So just imagine if 3 years from now, 1/3 of everybody in your town is gone. 1/3 of the doctors, 1/3 of the people at the grocery store, 1/3 of the people running the gas stations, 1/3 of the farmers in your country, everything. I mean, and it takes centuries to recoup those losses. You can't produce what you did, and it's hardly a time for war.
Another direct descendant of Philip IV, John II attempts to reduce.
Notice the situation here now, right? So you have, again, we're talking direct male line descent over here, but you've got descent over here through a female, which is exactly what Edward III is claiming.
Charles's influence and sideline him, but fails. In response, Charles II, who controls part of Normandy, allies himself with Edward III, who sends his son, Edward of Woodstock, known as the Black Prince, to Guyenne to organize chevauchée.
And the Black Prince, had he lived and become Edward IV, and if he had lived another year, he would have become Edward IV, could have completely changed the whole trajectory of all of this. If he had outlived his father and the throne had not passed to Richard II, who knows what we're talking about right now.
Objective is once again to destroy and plunder the countryside while avoiding pitched battles. From Bordeaux, he moves up the Garonne to Toulouse, then turns towards Carcassonne, devastating everything in his path. He then returns to Bordeaux, laden with wealth and prisoners without ever being challenged. The following year, John II has Charles II arrested for treason. The Black Prince then begins a second chevauchée heading towards central France. This time, the French army manages to intercept him, and a major battle takes place near Poitiers. Once again, English archers destroy the French cavalry.
At what point, if you're France, do you learn that this is how you're losing these battles, right? Is to archers, and figure out a different strategy? Because again, 60 years later at Agincourt, same thing.
This time, King John II is captured. His son Charles then takes control of the kingdom in a highly unstable context. On one hand, mercenaries who had been employed in the wars, now without work, regroup into bands known as the Great Companies and begin plundering the countryside. On the other hand, Charles II of Navarre escapes from prison and, taking advantage of his popularity, raises a significant army in Normandy. Meanwhile, in London, Edward III demands 4 million gold écus and half of the French territory in exchange for the release of John II. This request triggers a revolt among Parisian merchants who fear having to pay for the ransom through new taxes. Charles has to leave the capital, while in the north, peasants rise up in turn, violently attacking the nobility.
So where London, where England is heavily at a disadvantage in terms of population, 16 million versus 4 million, and by now you've had the plague, so it may only be 2 or 3 million people in England. You make up with that for that with allies like Navarre. You make up for that with internal strife that's happening that is distracting and dividing France, and that's how you're evening the odds.
Charles II brutally suppresses this revolt, then enters Paris accompanied by English troops. The Parisians turn against him, ultimately allowing the regent to regain control of the capital.
So again, Chevauchier, what we're talking about, this is, think Sherman's March to the Sea. This is scorched earth policy.
Facing a difficult situation, the regent Charles has no choice but to refuse Edward III's terms. The latter then launches a new chevauchée, this time with the aim of annihilating the French army and being crowned King of France in the Cathedral of Reims, where French kings are traditionally crowned. He lands at Calais and heads toward the city. But on the other side, Charles clearly understands the situation and this time avoids a pitched battle at all costs. He harasses the English vanguard and rearguard and orders the people of the countryside to take refuge inside fortified towns with their food and belongings. As a result, Edward III crosses empty lands and reaches Reims without a fight.
And this is what you really need to do in this situation, right? You've got an enemy army operating deep within your territory. They can't stay there for years and years laying siege to towns. And so you try to hold off and you try to put them at a severe disadvantage where they can't logistically stay.
He begins the siege of the city, but soon finds himself running out of supplies. He is then forced to abandon his plan and wanders through Burgundy in search of food. In March 1360, he learns that a French fleet has destroyed the coastal town of Winchelsea. Furious, he now heads towards Paris in order to force Charles into a pitched battle. But in the capital, the population and the French army are sheltered behind closed walls. Edward III does not get his battle and, completely out of supplies, urgently sets out. On the night of Easter Monday, while camped in a field not far from Chartres, a huge storm breaks out. Very large hailstones fall and, according to some sources, kill around 1,000 men and 6,000 horses.
Something like this happens, especially at this time and place in history. You're thinking, man, God is clearly against us in all of this.
Terrified by this apocalyptic scene, Edward III is said to have seen it as a divine punishment and to have promised God that he would make peace. The next day, negotiations begin, leading on May 8, 1360, to the Treaty of Bretigny. France cedes a quarter of its territories and must pay 3 million gold écus. In exchange, King John II is released, and Edward III officially renounces the throne of France.
For now.
In France, John II and his son try to regain control of the country, which is still being ravaged by the Great Companies. They restore the country's finances, creating the franc in order to pay part of the ransom to the English. In England, Edward III bans the French language, which was still used in courts.
This is a big, big moment, right? For Yeah, 1066. For nearly 300 years, French has been the language of the English court. And now they're going to start speaking English. It's not English the same way we speak English today, but it's starting to become that. In another 100 or 200 years, you're going to start to really recognize the way that they speak.
And tribunals. In 1364, John II dies, and his son Charles V becomes king. He continues with the reforms and completely reorganizes the army, reducing the influence of the nobles in favor of a centralized force under his control. He hires permanent soldiers and places them under the command of experienced captains.
A permanent retinue is not a common thing all across Europe at this point. So having professional soldiers whose full-time job it is to be soldiers, that's an advantage.
But in Burgundy and in the Rhone Valley, he fails to put an end to the great companies, which continue to extort villages and prey on travelers along the roads, including around Avignon, where Pope Urban V resides. Charles V then proposes to the Pope to employ the great companies officially to launch a crusade against Granada in the Iberian Peninsula, but unofficially to intervene in a civil war in Castile alongside Henry of Trastamara, who is fighting his half-brother King Peter I, known as the Cruel.
You have to expect that the 100 Years' War was not going to stay contained to France. It's inevitably going to cause destabilization and ripple effects in other neighboring kingdoms.
The fifth thus gets rid of the great companies at the Pope's expense while supporting an ally. His plan works, and Henry drives out Peter I, who takes refuge in Bordeaux to ask the Black Prince and Charles II of Navarre for help. They agree and set out to reconquer Castile. Charles V then sends new reinforcements to Henry, who prevails once again, assassinates Peter I, and becomes King of Castile, allied with France.
You're still, at this point, a couple hundred years away from Castile, Aragon, Navarre all becoming Spain.
In Guyenne, the Black Prince has received no financial compensation for his campaign in Castile. He therefore raises taxes to restore his finances. Many cities oppose this and ask Charles V for help.
This is inevitably what's going to happen, right? You have areas that were under French authority that are now under English authority. And the first time they don't like what's happening, they're just, it's like when parents get divorced and daddy does something you don't like and you can go run to mom now because they're different authorities. That's what these people are doing.
Then relies on Bertrand du Guesclin, an experienced commander, to reconquer the territories ceded to the English. His strategy of attrition proves effective, and the towns fall one by one, some rallying to the French side of their own accord. In London, Edward III, seeing that the clauses of the Treaty of Bretigny are not being respected, resumes the offensive. But not having the financial means to attack France directly, he organizes new chevauchés that are meant to pay for themselves. However, these are again undermined by the scorched earth strategy. In 1372, a powerful Castilian fleet arrives at La Rochelle and destroys the English fleet stationed there. Furious, Edward III gives a large army to his son John of Gaunt so that he can carry out the longest and most destructive chevauchée possible.
Remember that name, John of Gaunt, because as we get into the reign of Richard II and kind of the initial ground laying of the conflict that's going to become the Wars of the Roses in the 1400s for England, this is a big part of it.
It leaves from Calais and ravages everything across a width of 20 kilometers. The French armies move ahead of them, emptying the countryside, destroying bridges, and harassing isolated English troops. Winter falls, and once again, the English find themselves short of food. They eventually manage to reach Bordeaux, exhausted and having lost many men and horses. In 1377, Edward III...
There you go, you've lost almost all of the territory that you had just a decade or so earlier.
Dies at the age of 64. England now controls only a few towns in France, while the economic situation is catastrophic.
So you've had the plague, you've had decades of war. You're now ruled by a child king in Richard II because Edward the Black Prince dies in 1376, and then Edward III dies in 1377. So now you got a kid on the throne that's going to be kind of run by regents for a time,
leading to major peasant revolts that tear the country apart. In 1380, Charles V dies and is replaced by his son Charles VI, but being only 12 years old, he falls under the regency of his uncles. At the age of 20, he takes the reins of the country and attempts to subdue Brittany, which resists him. But during the expedition, he's struck by a fit of madness and kills 4 of his own men. Deemed unfit to rule, his wife, Isabeau of Bavaria, presides over a regency council made up of Charles VI's brother, Louis of Orleans, and their uncle Louis of Anjou, John of Berry, and Philip the Bold.
It's amazing how the parallels exist here, right? Because Charles VI, fit of madness, you've got other family members that are going to kind of run the country. You have Richard II, young and impulsive, who eventually is going to fall prey to other relatives who are going to run the country. And then Charles VI, his grandson, later down the road is going to be Henry VI, who's also going to suffer from fits of madness, and his wife's going to run the country.
The latter, who is Duke of Burgundy and Count of Flanders, becomes increasingly influential. He favors appeasement with England in order to secure trade in Flanders and tries to establish territorial continuity between his lands. At his death, his son John the Fearless takes over, but he's quickly pushed aside by his cousin and rival, Louis of Orleans. In response, John the Fearless, who is very popular in Paris, has him assassinated, triggering a civil war between the Burgundian camp and the one known as the Armagnacs. In England, the new King Henry V, a direct descendant of Edward III, takes advantage.
So we skipped over a lot there. Richard II was the Black Prince's son. He's eventually going to be deposed and will end up dying as well. Deposed by his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, who was the son of John of Gaunt. And is really not the next in line to the throne after Richard, but he takes it by right of conquest. And there's a whole story behind all of that we talked about in our videos about the Wars of the Roses. So now Henry IV has died, and now his son, Henry V, is going to be one of the all-time great English kings, but he's only going to be on the throne for 9 years.
Advantage of the instability to claim the throne of France. In 1415, he lands in Normandy, not for a chevauchée, but for a campaign of conquest. A French army, mainly composed of Armagnacs, tries to drive him back, but on the battlefield, despite their numerical superiority, they are severely defeated.
One of the all-time great victories in English history, celebrated for centuries afterwards.
Henry V's army, weakened by disease, returns to England and comes back 2 years later to conquer Normandy. This time, the Armagnacs and the Burgundians are too busy fighting each other to intervene. But after the fall of Normandy, and while the English are threatening Paris, John the Fearless and Charles, the heir to the throne who's now leading the Armagnacs, agree to meet on a bridge in order to unite against the English. But John the Fearless is assassinated there. Philip the Good, the son of John the Fearless, then chooses to ally himself with the English against the Armagnacs with the support of Charles VI, known as the Mad, and Isabeau of Bavaria. At Troyes, a treaty is signed to disinherit Charles from the throne in favor of Henry V, who marries the Princess Catherine.
And this could have been it, right? I mean, if Henry V lives, and he's only 35 when he dies, if he lives to be 60, you probably have stability, and you probably have a situation where England and France, at least for a while, are united under one king.
She then becomes Queen of England, while Henry V is now the heir and regent to the throne of France. He enters Paris alongside Charles VI, to the cheers of the crowds who are exhausted by years of war. On the other side, Charles, isolated, denounces this treaty. In 1422, Henry V and then Charles VI died 2 months apart. Henry VI, the son of Henry V and Catherine, only 11 months old, is proclaimed.
You have an 11-month-old who is now the king of both. Had this instead been a 25-year-old, so if Henry V lives longer, and if he doesn't suffer from fits of madness in that scenario, completely different history.
King of France and England. But in the south, the disinherited Charles also proclaims himself King of France, and the war continues. In 1428, the English begin the siege of Orleans. It is then that a peasant girl named Joan of Arc appears. She says she hears voices telling her to free France and place the heir Charles
I don't
on
know. Sounds like a witch to me. That's what they're going to say.
Throne. She obtains from him the right to take part in the defense of Orleans. There, she galvanizes the troops who, in only 10 days, lift the siege.
Huge.
The following month, the Armagnacs take Reims, allowing the coronation of Charles VII. Joan of Arc then convinces him to besiege Paris, but the expedition fails. Joan of Arc is eventually captured by the Burgundians, who sell her to the English. After a long trial, she is burned alive at the stake in Rouen.
And this just shows you where women are in history, right? If this had been a man who had won these great victories, they'd see him as a fearless warrior. Instead, they're like a woman who says she talks to God and then defeats us on the battlefield, clearly a witch.
The English, sensing the tide turning, then crown Henry VI, now 10 years old, in haste in the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. In 1435, the Burgundians and the Armagnacs put an end to the Civil War. Charles VII then enters Paris, and the French army gains the upper hand again. But weakened by the many years of war, both sides sign a truce that lasts 5 years. The French then resume the offensive, integrating into their army a brand new light artillery that allows them to dominate the English archers. In 2 years, Normandy and then Guyenne are taken. But in Bordeaux, the population revolts, supporting England, with which it trades. English troops land as reinforcements, and an Anglo-Gascon army goes to meet the French army, but it is severely defeated by artillery. In 1450,
there's a great example of, okay, you've been losing to archers for years, and now you've got new technology that you can deploy on the battlefield that gives you an advantage. And that's just how history goes, right? Especially in wartime, you develop new technologies, new strategies, new tactics, and it's constantly changing.
England is finally forced to cede Guyenne to France. The country now controls only Calais, and the front stabilizes, marking the unofficial end of the 100 Years' War.
And why does it end here? Well, because at this point, England is going to be dealing with its own crises, internal crises. You're going to be in the Wars of the Roses in the 1450s and 1460s, and even into the early 1470s. And then you're going to have dynastic succession crises, like in 1483 when you have Richard III taking the throne after his brother dies. And then in 1485, you're going to have Henry Tudor come in. So England just does not have time to focus on this. It's only going to really be under Henry VIII that they're going to start focusing on trying to take territory back in France.
No treaty is signed, but after 116 years and many truces, the conflict is effectively over. This war, and especially the Black Death, have had a major impact on the people of both kingdoms. France and England have lost around 40% of their population and will need 2 more centuries to recover their pre-war demographics. The economies of both kingdoms are weakened. In France, the countryside has been heavily affected, with part of the population now living in fortified towns. The nobles have lost prestige and power to the benefit of the monarchy, which now controls a centralized, permanent, and professional army. The war has strengthened the unity of the country, while the many chevauchés have fueled anti-English sentiment. In England, after the failure in France, Henry VI who, like his grandfather, suffers from bouts of madness, is undermined by a long civil war that tears the country apart. In the 1470s, England attempts a new incursion into France, but without success. This time, a peace treaty is signed, and the King of England renounces the French crown.
Kinda. He's still going to claim it for a while. All right, that was good. They always do a great job with their stuff. It's a great way to view history by seeing it all on a map. So I want to give a shout out to my friend John in New Albany, Indiana. John, good to see you again down in Tennessee a couple of months ago. Looking forward to seeing you again down the road. And then Lachlan in Selkirk up in Canada. Thank you both so much for your support on Patreon. Check out some of these videos up on the screen related to the topic we just talked about, or the playlist of all of my videos where I've taken a look at geohistory. Thanks for watching.